we must think differently. We must teach entrepreneurship thinking differently from day one. This is why, groups like Started Up, Innovate Within, and Rise that are in the school systems and teaching entrepreneurship along with the curriculum is so critical.
Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in the state. Today, I'm joined by Christopher Toph, now in his second year as CEO of Elevate Ventures, one of the most active seed and early-stage venture capital firms in the U.S. Toph knows venture capital inside and out. He's a serial entrepreneur who has co-founded 8 businesses in a variety of industries over the last 30 years, leading to multiple exits involving Fortune 500 companies. He's been involved in more than $600 million in transactions across multiple sectors, including artificial intelligence, software as a service, hard tech, broadband, entertainment, investment banking, and real estate. Toph's success, much of it in the tech industries, is a giant leap from his upbringing outside of Lafayette in a farmhouse with dirt floors. He was the youngest of 5 children, all of whom became familiar with manual labor as they helped out on the farm. Toph and his siblings also had to figure out how to pay for college, which for him meant starting a house painting company with an older brother in Chicago's suburbs. After graduating from Purdue in 1992 with a degree in construction management, Toph became a project manager for a firm in Atlanta where he picked up enough business experience to strike out on his own. He started his first company, Starcom Broadband, in Indianapolis in 1997 with a partner from the painting company that he and his brother had started. Over the years, he's co-founded companies that were later sold to the likes of Motorola and Comcast. He's been an investment banker, and he's led companies like Demand Jump, the marketing tech firm he founded and led immediately before taking the top job at Elevate Ventures. Toph has used his position at Elevate Ventures to promote Indiana as a global leader in innovation, most notably organizing Rally, a 3-day global innovation conference that launched last year, bringing together executives, entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders across a variety of industries. Rally's $5 million pitch competition drew global attention, attracting almost 500 pitches from 44 countries. Here's our conversation. Toph, welcome to Indiana 250 Podcast. Thanks for making time to be with us today.
Thanks, Nate. I'm stoked to be here. And I just have to say one thing on that intro. Great intro, by the way. Your writers are amazing. But I actually grew up on a particle board floor, not dirt floors, but dirt floors does sound pretty good.
Let's go with dirt floors. So first, Toph, we've got to get out of the way. Tell us how your nickname Toph came about.
So it happened on the basketball court. So in high school, people, when they won the ball, they would say Day, right? My last name. And in college, I wasn't a D1 player, but the fraternity leagues and all that kind of fun stuff, or playing at the co-rec for 4 hours straight, people started saying Chris when they won the ball. I didn't pass him the ball because I didn't know who that was. And they, why won't you pass me the ball? I'm like, why do you keep yelling Chris? And so that's how Toph started.
Love it. Well, Toph, you have an interesting story for a tech entrepreneur. You grew up poor in the 1980s in a farmhouse with a dirt floor. Most of the tech gadgets we're familiar with today didn't exist back then, and your family didn't even have a TV. How would you describe your upbringing, and how did that experience put you on the path you're on today?
The household we grew up in, so it was a small farm, 100-acre farm, and we had crops and hogs. We had 200 head of hog at the peak, 6 cows and a horse. And when my dad wanted us to kill chickens, we would go to the neighbors and swap some pigs for some chickens or whatever. So anyways, but I think it was, we worked. And when we got rid of the hogs, we had 5 acres of garden. And we were taught work ethic, how to think ahead, 3 steps ahead. And that coupled with getting on these yellow school buses and going to these other cities and seeing these pyramids and, the pyramids on the north side of Indy when we're going to Conner Prairie, and who works in those places, right? Going to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, and you'd see all those high rises. Like, who are these people? What do they do for a living? Just made me really curious.
You mentioned earlier you played a little basketball. Fun fact, I hear you were in the movie Hoosiers as well.
You know what? I have 2 major things to talk about there. In the movie Hoosiers, I'm very famous. Gene Hackman, and I call him Gene. Good friends.
Right.
I'm kidding, of course. And so I'm in the movie Hoosiers for 3 seconds, and then I'm have a swimming world record. I'm a world record holder as an attendee at the Olympic swim trials.
And I joined you in that effort.
Sweet.
That was a lot of work. What was your 3 seconds of fame in that movie? What were you doing?
So right when Ollie is shooting the free throws to like go ahead or win that game, there's a drum beat, and I'm standing on the first row, like right under the basket with this really dorky look on my face, and that's my 3 seconds.
That's awesome. So your first real experience as an entrepreneur was starting a painting company with your brother. I think I read that you grew that to more than a dozen employees or so. What did you learn from starting and growing that company?
Oh, 1,000 things. So number one, I realized you can't expect your team to work as many hours as you do. I literally worked from like 6 to midnight. And so I had, some of the team almost walked off the job on me once because I expected them to work way more than they should have. But I think it taught me to think through things, not be afraid of things you may not understand. I didn't know that the difference between oil and latex paint, for example. I ruined an entire 5-gallon bucket of expensive oil paint by trying to thin it with water. So 1,000 stories there. The second job we did, I mispriced it by over $3,000. We lost our rear ends.
You won't do that again, right?
Well, I did make a mistake I'll share later. Again, it was a $100,000 mistake. But you learn, right? Don't be afraid of what you don't understand. Break it down to pieces and parts, and usually it'll go okay.
So the painting company initially put you on a construction track. You studied construction management at Purdue and started your career in construction, but then you pivoted to broadband by founding a company called Starcom, which was your first company, if I remember right. What led you to move from your first track construction to broadband? That's a big leap.
It was a means to an end. So my first job was detasseling corn. Second job was putting trash in a dumpster on a construction site. The guy I worked for had a Bronco and a bag phone. And I thought, if I could own a Bronco and a bag phone and do what that guy does, someday I'll be successful. I've never had a Bronco or a bag phone yet, so I'm still not successful. But I thought he was a general contractor. And so a commercial general contractor building a student housing community up at Purdue. So I went off on this whole trajectory to be a commercial general contractor someday. Knew I wanted to own my own company. And it wasn't until about 3 years out of school that I realized that guy was a commercial developer that self-performed general construction. And I was working in Atlanta at the time, and I'm like, oh no, I've spent 8 years of my life preparing, to do something that I don't want to do. I want to be a commercial developer. So I moved back to Indianapolis in that 96, 97 timeframe with the whole goal of trying to figure out how to be a commercial developer. I had no net worth, had a negative net worth. I had decent salary, right? But the reason I started Starcom Broadband was to go and try and make money to become a commercial developer. And so I had relationships with all these real estate developers, multifamily community owners. So that's really why I started that first company, was to be a commercial developer. And I ended up doing some commercial development later, but that put me on this tech path that I just got addicted to.
That's neat. And we're going to talk a lot more about the tech path here shortly. I want to talk about partnerships and partners. And your first business partner, if I have it right, was your brother. But you've been involved in many deals over the years that had partners or maybe multiple partners. But as I know, and a bad partnership can sink a business. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs about thinking about how to choose a partner, and especially in the business context?
Number one, you're already getting to know your partners now. You just don't know it yet, right? Building relationships, and who knows how those paths crisscross 3, 5, 10 years later, 15, 20 years later. But I think really important is that everybody starts off on the same footing. So a couple of things to consider are, actually not to consider, but things you must have in place, I believe. A buy-sell agreement. So if things aren't going well, there's a buy-sell agreement that's in place. It's objective. Also vesting. So making sure that each partner vests. I even did this in my most recent business, but making sure each partner vests over, let's say, 4 years with a 1-year cliff, and make it really painful if somebody leaves. All the way to, how you typically put in $1,000 or $100 or whatever to open that first checking account. Whatever you put in on that day, if you bolt within 4 years, that's what you get back.
That's a pretty big incentive to not go anywhere.
Yes.
See the business through, right?
Yeah. And everybody's excited on day one. So people pretty much agree to anything, right? So just make sure you're both locked in.
I've had business partnerships, and one of the things that I've found is that when you have complementary skills, meaning your skill and my skills are different,
yes,
and we also understand, what those skills are and kind of talk about it beforehand. And,
that's right.
And just be transparent about it. That helps a great deal too, right?
100%. We've
talked about you've had some interesting experiences, but not all of them have worked out incredibly well. And usually, if you're an entrepreneur and you're a serial entrepreneur, you're going to have a failure here once in a while, right? And so, am I right early on in your 20s that you had one of those types of experiences where you almost lost it all, or
yes,
were close to it? Tell us a little bit about that challenge and how you dealt with it, and maybe what you learned from it.
So at the core, the whole story goes back to relationships. And so in any business you start, I've always believed that the quote unquote enemies, the competition, they're really not. They're not your enemies. They are your competition, but make sure you develop those relationships starting from day one. And there's many ways to do that. And if we hadn't done that from day one in Starcom, then the story that we're talking about here would never have happened. In fact, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I don't know where I'd be, but I probably wouldn't be right here. But we had made a decision this is back when the MSOs were paying door fees to multifamily communities, and they might still be doing that today to get business. So we made a decision to do that with a big multifamily owner in Michigan. And it was a big chunk of the cash that we had on the balance sheet. And the interesting thing is making that decision to do that is what got us a lot closer to bankruptcy, but it's also the decision why we sold. And so long story short, we made that decision to do it. It was right when the dot bomb era was looming, and we had a $7 million term sheet that was on the table. We had signed and getting ready to start diligence the following week. And the lead VC called up and said, we're out. Well, we had a very capital intensive business. And long story short, that put into effect a chain reaction of things and decisions that we had to make. But Comcast called up one day serendipitously and said, it's time for you to go away, because we had, in effect, control the Ann Arbor market, and we just hadn't turned our signal on yet. And they said, you got to go away. And we negotiated a price for passings and a price for subscribers and for all of our contracts. And 10 days later, we exited.
Nice. But some scary moments, it sounds like.
It was 6 months of meeting weekly with our board, with our major investors, and exploring all paths.
What was a lesson that you took out of that experience?
Just don't overextend yourself, right? Always have a plan B and a plan C. When we wrote that check, I never thought in a million years that term sheet that was signed would go away. So no deal's ever done until the cash is in the bank.
That's for sure. So I spent a number of years practicing law, and I learned through all those different transactions, working with lots of entrepreneurs, business people, that you don't start counting your dollars, and you really can't even think about the dollars until the deal is actually closed. So it's an important one. Let's take a quick break. This is Off the Record Podcast.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Off the Record Podcast. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, and I'm talking with Toph Day, CEO of Elevate Ventures. I want to turn now to your current role, Toph, at Elevate Ventures, which, for lack of a better term, the Elevate Ventures is the state's effort initially. Anyway, I'm going to look forward to talking to you more about this, about growing and seeding companies in our state, high-tech companies and all types of different types of companies in different sectors. First, what made you decide to take the plunge into more public service type role, like leading Elevate Ventures?
So Elevate Ventures, I believe, is one of the most successful public-private partnerships in the United States of all time. So some decisions made back in the Governor Daniels administration were to spin Elevate Ventures out from the IEDC and into a private entity so it could move at the speed of entrepreneurship, move at the speed of business. So and the IEDC is, in essence, think of that as an LP, right? And they're an amazing LP. So it's structured as an evergreen fund, and the momentum just becomes more and more and more and more. The reason that I got excited about the opportunity to be the CEO of Elevate Ventures is I believe we have so much pent-up opportunity and demand in the state of Indiana, the world just doesn't know it. And so all those previous businesses that you talk about, when I would travel around and meet with investors in other parts of the country, and you would talk about things like Purdue University, when they'd find out I went to school at Purdue, like, oh, that's awesome. That's Ivy League school. Where is that, on the East Coast? No, it's in West Lafayette,
That's
Indiana.
what they say about Indiana University as well, right?
Indiana University as well, right? The number one medical university in the United States, Notre Dame. People don't realize Notre Dame's in South Bend, Indiana. And the list goes on of I didn't know that. And so when I had the investment banking firm, we have all these incredible companies that are doing $5, $10, $50 million in revenue. And the software, the high-tech bankers, they basically sit in either New York City or San Francisco, and they'll parachute in to do a big deal, but they're not coming out here to do a $10, $20, $50 million revenue company. And so that was our thesis of our companies deserve to have great exits too. And once we got involved in the investment banking, I started to think about we can talk about in a little bit, but I started to think about this thesis for Indiana, and it just would literally make me sick to my stomach that we have so much opportunity, but we're not kind of taking this next big leap forward to lock arm in arm and say, you know what? We have collectively more number one or just as many number one or top 5 rankings globally in all sectors and facets of our state. The world just doesn't know it. And so that's a big reason why. I thought there's a platform to be helpful with that.
And you thought, given all your experiences and knowledge about the state and so forth, that it'd be a rewarding role.
Yeah, it's extremely rewarding. It's like it's not work, which is a problem.
And so
work until midnight every night.
But are you making your team work to midnight?
No.
So just tell us a little bit more about the basics today of Elevate. So today, am I correct that the amounts in terms of the investment amount that Elevate will put into a new company or existing company, it ranges from about $20,000 to $2 million. Is that still about the right range?
Yep, that's right. So we invest in innovation-driven companies, cross-sector, so software, hard tech, ag, food, sports tech, life sciences, healthcare, et cetera. $20,000 to about $2 million. We can invest up to $8 million in any given company. We invest in pre-seed, seed, and Series A stages. We've deployed over $175 million in market. It's been co-invested with $2.2 billion in co-investment dollars from nearly 3,000 VCs from across the planet.
That's an awesome track record. So you've been in the job now a couple of years. How long has it been?
July 18th will be my 2-year anniversary.
So you're getting ready for your 2-year anniversary. And so through this experience, what are your impressions in terms of today's Indiana entrepreneurial climate?
I think our entrepreneurial climate today, number one, if I go back to 1997 and compare it to now, it is night and day different and better, like 180 degrees different. And we think about our godfathers of some of the software companies, for example, and things that they've done, the David Beckers and Bill Godfreys and Don Browns, et cetera, who've built just incredible companies. If you fast forward to today, if you've worked hard, and even in your professional career, you haven't started a company yet, if you've worked hard, you've developed some relationships, et cetera, you can go raise $500,000, a couple $100,000, $500,000. Once you get some milestones hit, you can raise $1 million. I would say that in that pre-seed seed stage, and if you want to be an entrepreneur, it used to be if you said you're an entrepreneur, that meant you were unemployed. And I think that was definitely the kind of the culture here in Indiana going back 20, 30 years ago. I think that culture has shifted, but I think we still have a ways to go on our entrepreneurial ecosystem development and how we embrace failure, right? Calculated risk and embracing failure, because failure can lead to massive wins, right? Massive outcomes. So I think we can do a better job there, just in terms of pre-seed seed stage. Another major gap that we have today is we're really good in Indiana at exporting something called wealth. It's a silent export. And so, meaning when our winners of companies grow up and now they need $20, $50, $100 million of capital to raise during their growth stages, we historically aren't even at the table. All the coastal funds come in, they do those are the risk-adjusted returns. We don't invest in those rounds, and those are larger dollars at exit points. So when our companies are exiting for $100, $500, $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, well over 90% of those returns are getting exported to the coasts and recycled in those other markets. And so this is a big gap that we've got to fill.
Talking about the first piece that you mentioned, which is the culture of risk-taking. How do we create more of a critical mass of entrepreneurial risk takers in this state? And to your first point, make it okay. And for people to say, hey, you tried, it didn't work out this time, but I'm going to work with you again because I know you learned something from that. How do we create that culture of risk-taking? We
need to think differently. We need to change our entire mindset starting from when people are born, or for sure at kindergarten. NASA did a study in the 60s, and they studied, I can't remember how many, several hundred, let's say, roughly. That number might be slightly off, but they studied a bunch of kids at the kindergarten level. 98% of them, with the criteria they established, right, wrong, or different, were labeled as creative geniuses. They tracked those kids all the way through adulthood. In adulthood, and I mean like mid, late 20s, 2% of that population were considered creative geniuses. We hammer the creative genius out of our children in school. This is not just Indiana. This is how our education system works at large. We must think differently. We must teach entrepreneurship, thinking differently from day one. This is why groups like Started Up, Innovate Within, and Rise that are in the school systems and teaching entrepreneurship along with the curriculum is so critical. Some of the administrators out there don't like it. They don't understand it. Or they say, well, these students are inventing businesses that don't make sense. Well, of course they do, right? And that's part of failing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But you can fail small and fail fast, and that leads to something else that's more interesting. So I think it literally comes from day one of our culture.
So you're not necessarily born an entrepreneur, but you're suggesting that you can be taught and you grow up in a culture that will lead you to be more likely to try taking a risk and not necessarily going to work for a big company, but starting your own thing.
I do believe that entrepreneurship is a very manic career path to choose, if we want to call it a career path. You are king of the world or queen of the world one day, and the next morning you feel like the biggest loser, right? And you're trying to make payroll and you're curled up in a fetal position. So like it has these very big swings. So I don't necessarily think that everybody should be an entrepreneur, but I think that we should make it easier for all people to pursue that path should they want to.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you have any big ideas in terms of moving our state forward, something that might shake things up a little bit?
There's a few things that come to mind. Natural resources, nuclear fusion, and quantum computing. So just real quick on natural resources, I think it's time that we look at, we have some incredible natural resources. We're bordered by more water than we are land. No, not many people realize that. Well, how can we have 45 miles of beach? People say we don't have an ocean and we don't have mountains. Well, that might be true, but we do have 45 miles of beach that looks like the ocean. How can we better activate that? Right, for families and people to work, live, and play. How do we activate the Ohio River? How do we activate the White River going right through downtown Indianapolis? How about surfing in downtown Indianapolis?
I like that idea.
I think Denver's working on it, going through their city. So let's push the envelope and let ourselves think freely about what that could be. Natural resources, power, water, these are major issues. And especially with what's happening with like NVIDIA, right? And data centers, they're skyrocketing, but the power consumption, the cooling needs, we don't have enough power. And maybe fusion technology is getting to a point with some of the patents out there. Maybe we could tackle some of that with R1 research universities, right? But just imagine if we could crack the code on nuclear fusion. That would be game changing. We have all the people who understand that stuff right here in this state. How about quantum computing? Whoever solves that solves the world. Again, we have those resources here to invest. So I think there's some technologies that may seem like they're 100 years away or 50 years away. They're not. They're starting right now. We have all the people and the talent in the state to do it.
I like surfing on the White River. That sounds really good.
I might take up surfing.
Those are good and interesting ideas. So you and Governor Holcomb just announced a new $100 million growth stage fund at the Indiana Global Economic Summit. As I understand it, Elevate will contribute a portion of that fund, and then you'll also go out and raise some private dollars. Tell us about that new fund.
So it's super exciting. So as we talked just a moment ago about, Indiana has never had a growth stage fund for technology companies. Never. It's shocking. So for the first time ever, this fund will be focused on that Series B. So Elevate's pre-seed, seed, Series A. This fund will be focused on entering at Series B. So the winners are the winners of the winners. So these companies are doing $7, $8, $10 million in revenue, much different risk profile. And that fund will be around 12 to 15 companies that will be invested in over a period of roughly 5 years. The full fund life cycle will be similar to other funds, being 10 years with a few one-year extensions. But to recycle more returns in the state of Indiana, and will be cross-sector. So software, hard tech, life sciences, healthcare, food, ag, sports tech, et cetera. So we're fired up about it.
And some private dollars will come in to help support that, right?
Yeah, so we're going to take $25 million of the returns that we have, put that in as an anchor LP, and then go out and raise the rest of the money from the private market.
When do you think you'll make your first investment from that fund?
It'll be in 2025, and we're close to launching. We probably won't launch raising the fund for another roughly 60 days, plus or minus. And then we would expect to have first close, if not late this year, early next year, and then be in market, start investing in 2025.
So I want to turn now to Rally, the Rally conference that you launched last year. Tell us about how that came together and why Rally is so important.
Well, Nate, we live in the innovation capital of the world. The world just doesn't know it yet. And so the whole thesis of Rally is all those companies I used to have, 7 of them were in different verticals. So I was exposed to a lot of different types of people, et cetera, and whether it's investors or people that ran other companies, et cetera. I've discovered that I always get more value and learn more from people who don't do what I do on a daily basis, right? So when we interact, I learn something in almost every interaction. I'm like, what if I rethought how I think about that situation applied to this business? And so the world has changed forever. Today is the slowest rate of change we'll ever experience. And so that means cross-sector. So are we building a healthcare product? Nope. you're building a software, healthcare, hard tech, and Lord knows maybe even other industries involved in bringing any product to market today. So as we looked around, two high-level things. We didn't see anybody focusing on a festival, a conference, an experience that intentionally brings people together cross-sector. So all those sectors in one place at one time. Disparate stakeholders. So entrepreneurship innovation does not happen by investor and entrepreneur alone. It's foundation leaders, it's education leaders, it's policymakers, philanthropy leaders, economic development leaders, getting those disparate stakeholders in one place at one time. And then by default, when people come here, we are the number one place, ranked many, many times over and over again as the best place to host an event. So where better to launch the world's largest cross-sector innovation conference than right here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it happens to be called Rally.
So you've described a big aspect of Rally. I've heard you describe the importance of creative collisions, right? Tell us what you mean by that.
So creative collisions, creative convergence, what I mean by that is when the unexpected happens at a moment's notice and it transforms or changes the trajectory that you're on, whether it's personal or professional. So I'll give you a personal example. Last year, a lady comes running up and she's like, "You're Toph, right?" I'm like, "Yep." She goes, "I just have to tell you this story." She had wanted to get into cold plunges. And there was somebody at Rally, and I wish I knew the name. There was somebody at Rally last year that's an expert in cold plunge, and they do all kinds of podcasts or whatever. She met this person that she had been following on the internet. They live in different parts of the world. Met him serendipitously at Rally, and it's like she's like, "This is going to transform my life." You know, another company didn't have a lead investor for Series A, and they found their lead investor for Series A at Rally, and the investor was 5 miles down the road from them, and they never heard of each other.
It makes me think that in places like Silicon Valley, Austin, maybe Boston, that these creative collisions happen more often just because of the number of people, and
density.
The density, the number of people that are involved in the venture capital space and entrepreneurial sectors. But it feels like in Indiana, we got to be a little bit more intentional. I think that's what you're describing Rally is somewhat about, right?
Yeah, I love the word you just said, intentional. It's intentional connectivity. And those other markets are more mature. They've been around longer. They have more capital. So there's more people there naturally doing things. And so every morning in the coffee shop, they experience their own little mini rally.
And I read that last year at Rally, there were 21,539 creative collisions. Now, how did you guys measure that? How did you measure 21,539 creative collisions?
Through an app, right?
Okay.
So, and that's the ones we know of. So I can see with 100% certainty there were many more than that. But yeah, with the app, the meetings that we were able to track, it was over 21,000. It's insane.
That's cool.
In 2.5 days.
And 3,500 or so attended last year, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And
we had over 3,000. I get 3,113. I think it was the actual number, and we'll have over 3,000 again this year.
That's what I was going to ask next. Is you think it'd be about the same?
Yeah, I think it'd be about the same, maybe a little bit more. We're tracking ahead of ticket sales last year, and couldn't be more fired up.
So you had some no-name guys last year, Peyton Manning and Magic Johnson, right? No one heard of Peyton Manning around here. Do you have any star power this year coming up?
We do. We're really excited about it. So we have Tia White that runs AI for AWS. She's coming in, and she's more of our future speaker. We have A-Rod, all-time Grand Slam champion. And sometimes people ask me, like, well, why do you have these sports figures? What do they know about tech? Well, look what A-Rod's doing after baseball, right? And look at the fund, the investments that he makes into sports tech companies, et cetera. Jan Mardenborough, the Gran Turismo movie on Netflix. So he's the human, the real-life human that movie's about. Jan is an amazing human. He came into Rev because he wanted to just experience what Indy was all about. But what I talk about with Jan Mardenborough, the reason we have Jan isn't because that he just happened to do racing simulation as a kid, and then Nissan ran the global competition, and then they actually turned these guys into real race car drivers, right? And he's out winning races, all kinds of crazy stuff. But how we attract talent, how we compete for talent is going to change dramatically in the next few years. So you remember back in the 70s what Nike did going to high schools with shoes, et cetera. With all these AI tools coming out, companies are going to be able to track down to you as an individual who you are and what you're good at, what tools you're using and how efficient you are with them. Companies are going to start going into high schools and even to the middle schools and offering kids scholarships, paying for whatever it is to get them to come to commit to work at their company. We are going to see the competition for talent follow the way of sports in the not too distant future.
I think you just announced finalists for the $1 million in-prize pitch contest.
Yes.
And if I've got it right, 10 of the 25 finalists are Indiana-based startups. Yes. Is that right? And that's up from last year's pitch contest, right?
Yes.
That's
I think last year there were one or two.
I think I read there were 2 last year. Yep. So that's encouraging. What do you think causing that? I mean, that's pretty awesome to see 10 of the 25, and it's open globally, right?
Yes.
And so pretty awesome to see 10 of the finalists from Indiana.
Yeah, it's awesome. So we had, and I'm not sure exactly why that is, because all these are done with a third-party group of advisors. Like, we don't get in there and dictate, who those finalists actually become. So there's a whole process involved that's executed third-party. And so I think last year we had like 443 pitch applications. This year we had about 350 pitch applications. And one thing that I think we've definitely seen from just the first year and in the second year coming up now is people realize that it is a legit pitch competition. Like, they go through some rigor to get there, to not only become a finalist, but then to make it on stage. They go through a lot of rigor. And so when you're competing for up to $1 million in each studio, right, there's 5 of them, so it's up to $5 million. You don't just wake up one morning and decide you're going to go pitch for $1 million. I mean, it has to be tight. That business has to be tight. Interesting idea. And so the finalists this year, I think there's one or two countries that have finalists. And then I can't remember how many states it was, but we had applications from, I think, 15 countries and roughly 20 states, I think it was. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head. And then about 350 actual applications. And last year, those 5 winners, 4 of those 5 winners we have funded, and they have either already or in the process of setting up either shop or expanding their business right here in Indiana.
That's excellent. Good track record. So you mentioned earlier, Indiana is the innovation capital of the world. I gotta pause on that for a second and ask you about it. So it seems really aspirational, which is awesome to say Indiana's the innovation capital of the world. But a lot of people may not actually think about that. If you're sitting in California, they may not say, well, yeah, of course, Indiana's innovation capital of the world. How did you, if you did, how did you come up with that? And do you have that trademarked or something?
Yes.
Something you do?
Yes.
You have it trademarked.
Trademark's pending.
So tell us about that, just that idea. I love it because it is so aspirational.
Try to keep us in 2 minutes. So 15 years ago is when this idea first came in my head. And I used to think of it as the nation's nucleus. I thought Indiana is actually the nation's nucleus. The world just didn't know it yet. Then I came across this concept called the productivity boom that really put all the narrative into perspective for me. So global economists talk about the productivity boom. And it's basically about the disruption of data and technology faster than ever with all industries. And this is not me saying this. This is global economists. And so they believe that the epicenter of this is going to occur in the middle core of the United States. They believe that's going to happen because of proximity of industries with one another and cost structure. So if all that's true, then there is no question that we actually can be, I think we already are, that epicenter. And then I changed nation's nucleus to innovation capital of the world. I was laying in bed at one night and it just popped in my mind, innovation capital of the world. But I believe we already are. And to make a statement like that, some people look at us a little crazy. But would you have thought that Silicon Valley would be the successor to almond fields? Probably not. And that's all because this guy, Robert Shockley, went from Boston out there. He found some people to give him some money and, changed the transistor to a chip, right? And then look what happened after that. So if we look at the 7 reasons why I think we are infrastructure, talent, mission critical industry, technology, cost of living, lifestyle, regulatory environment. And when you look through those 7 ingredients, we have more number 1 rankings that I can find, more number 1 rankings and top 5 rankings collectively than in their state. And we probably don't have time to rattle through those. But these are like just a couple. Do we have time just for a couple?
Of course.
So infrastructure. We have the number 1 ranked infrastructure in the U.S. with the only fully funded plan for 20 years with cash. We are the best place to host an event. You think about walkability for all these events, walking around downtown. We have 3 premier inland ports. The list, there's several other infrastructure rankings that I'll pause on for now. We'll go to talent. We graduate the 2nd highest number of undergraduate engineers regionally, only to the Research Triangle. That's the only one that beats us. So talent comes here. We educate the world's talent right here. If I go into mission critical industry, capitals of the world, RV capital of the world, wood capital of the world, amateur sports capital of the world, racing capital of the world, orthopedics capital of the world, capital of the world. So let's think about orthopedics. We contribute like 47% of the $50 billion United States GDP in orthopedics. We have the highest ranked pharma company in the world. We have the number 1 pure play ag company. We have the number 2 animal health company. We have the number 2 healthcare system, Elevance. We have the largest duck farm. The list goes on.
I like that one, the largest duck farm.
Duck farm. I literally talked to somebody who was in China eating duck, and on the menu it said from XYZ Farm. That was from Northern Indiana. I've lost my train of thought where we are, but mission critical industry, technology, there's been, $10 billion in the last 7-8 years of tech exits. We're number 1 in cell phone coverage for a long time. Governor Holcomb, right, there's a big push for getting broadband to every household in the state of Indiana. If we go to cost of living, number one for renters, number one for first-time home buyers. If you go to lifestyle, number one children's museum in the world. If you go to regulatory environment, we have one of the lowest tax rates in the entire country. And we were ranked number one for regulatory environment a few years ago by Forbes because we try to genuinely reach across the aisle and work with one another.
It's clear and evident why you are leading the state's venture capital efforts, given the energy that you have. So that was
awesome. About this stuff.
Awesome.
I really do. I feel it with every fiber in my body.
Well, Toph, we've made it to Off the Record Speed Round. So
Sweet.
Hang on to your hat. I'm going to give you some questions, and you try to give me quick answers. They don't all have to be super quick, though. There's some that you can go on in just a little bit. So, but the first one probably be super quick. Your favorite movie?
Hoosiers.
Oh, well, that's a natural. You were in it. You were a starring role with Gene Hackman. Favorite place to vacation?
That's a hard one, but I'm just going to go with Seaside, Florida.
Favorite musical artist?
Michael Jackson.
What's the first thing you do in the morning?
That's a great. What do I do in the morning? The first thing I do in the morning is I get a glass of water.
Title of the last book you read?
I'm going to go with Pillar-Based Marketing since I wrote it. Co-wrote it.
You've read it several times.
Yes.
What food can you not live without?
Pretzels.
Michael Jordan or LeBron James?
Oh, Michael Jordan.
Okay, this one you can go on a little bit longer. Best advice you ever received?
Manage by fact.
Advice for a young person who wants to become a leader?
Listen.
That's a good one. Toph, you've been an awesome guest. Thank you for joining me in the Indiana 250 podcast, and thank you for your work in promoting Indiana as a hub for innovation, actually for making Indiana the innovation capital of the world with all the people that you collaborate with. So thank you for all your good work.
Thanks, Nate. It's a blast to be here.
Thanks to Elevate Ventures CEO Toph Day for our conversation today. To learn more about other leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list, go to indiana250.com and look for a Page 2 feature each week in IBJ. We'll be back with a new Indiana 250 off-the-record conversation soon.